Today's video is in memory of my father. It's really hard for me to talk about, but he recently passed away, so I want to dedicate this one to him and show you guys and tell you guys all about why I started gaming in the first place. So, my father was the person who got me into gaming in the first place, and just a few weeks ago, we lost him. To be honest, I'm really heartbroken, as I'm sure you can imagine, but he was amazing. He was just an amazing person. And why you're here is because he got me into video games. When I was 2 to 3, my dad had a PlayStation 2 that I grew up playing Tekken on. And he loved all the characters and he thought they were really funny. He always played the girl characters, the goofy weirdo ones, or Jin Kazama. He really liked Jin Kazama. And he was good at video games, so he played them quite a bit. My mom used to tell me about when she would go over when they were first dating, and he lived with his grandmother at the time, and they were college-age people, and he had this room and a really nice place, and she would fall asleep on the couch and just hear KO and all the Tekken taglines and stuff, and it was really special to her. Like it is very special to me. But since he loved Tekken, we had Tekken on the PlayStation 2, and that was one of the other games that I was allowed to watch because, it wasn't a super gory game. Tekken isn't a super gory game for the most part. There are some parts of, that aren't super kosher, I guess, but it's definitely not like a Mortal Kombat type deal. And so when my dad grew up, is the time that my dad was around 50 years old, so when he grew up was the time of video games really starting. And so a lot of these old YouTubers, you guys are probably around the same age. And he got started with the ColecoVision, and he would always talk about how he'd play these baseball games on it. And that was really just an interesting one to me because I was I've never heard about these games. And we emulated them a couple times and tried them out. And oh my goodness, have those aged quite horrendously. But the controller was really weird because it's basically a keypad and there were these different overlays that you put on it. And the amount of nostalgia he's had for those overlays was so funny. But when he actually started playing the game on the emulator, I just remember him being like, oh Jesus, this is not very good. Then he also had the Atari 2600 and he always talked about how much he loved playing pole position on that console. And pole position was a very special game to him, and he always talked about it all the time. And so a couple of years ago for Christmas one year, he was a really hard guy to get a Christmas present for, right? I mean, I feel like a lot of dads are like that, but I just all the things he could ever want, really, he would just buy for himself. And then it was he didn't have a lot of things that he wanted. So the 3 things that maybe he wanted throughout the year, he would just buy immediately, right? So there's not a lot to get him. But I was in a retro game store that had just opened in my hometown, and I found Pole Position. I got that for him, and we didn't have an Atari, but it was just a good kind of memento. And I'm actually, now I'm getting that game, so that should be nice to put up with the collection, obviously, and honor his memory with that. But that same Christmas, I put a bunch of emulators on his computer, and I showed him how you work all of them, and we started playing the original Pole Position for the first time. He had probably played it in 30 years. And it was just really funny because, again, with all these old games with him, it was always funny because, he'd talk about them, he'd have all this nostalgia for them, and we'd play it, and he was like, oh, lordy, this wasn't actually very good. But, I always liked that perspective he had on it, and I think that sort of gave me a love and a really big interest in retro games. This is a lot about him right now. I promise it will sort of get into me, but also this video is honoring him, so if it doesn't do super well in the YouTube algorithm, I don't really give a shit. I want to remember my dad, and if you guys care about me enough to watch this video, it means a lot. But then he said it sort of got more serious when he got an NES, and he would talk about playing the original Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt. He was a big, hunter family, too, and he would always, went actually hunting quite a bit. So he really liked Duck Hunt because of that, because that was that sort of version. He also grew up going to arcades and all that. I don't quite know as much about that, because he didn't usually talk about that quite as much. So I'm not entirely sure. I know he used to go to the arcade just because my mom would bring up how she was a gamer at the arcade, which is funny because she's not really a gamer, but she did play Pac-Man and stuff. So they talk about the arcade a little bit. But he really started getting into it more so, he said, on the NES, and he used to play Super Mario Bros. And a lot of the sports games. My dad always had this like dual thing. He was a big athlete, and he was always like this nerd. It was the two sides of him. And it's really funny because I think that's sort of, where I am now. I, got recruited to college to for volleyball. I had grown up playing sports my entire life. Now I go to the gym all the time. That is like my new sport, and I'm very competitive. And I was always very interested in video games as well. And so it's just really interesting how much we've mirrored each other in that way. And then when the NES was sort of phasing out, the Super Nintendo came around. My dad did get one of those, but he didn't like it very much from what he told me. Because really what he always talks about from that era is that he had a really good friend who actually works for Dungeons and Dragons now, or did. I don't know if he's stopped, but really cool guy. He has a Sega Genesis. So my dad would go over there all the time, and they would play games like Golden Axe and all of these really amazing Sega games. And my dad was just this super nerd, right? So these high fantasy games like Golden Axe were super interesting to him, and he loved them. And really, especially in the later years with my dad, a lot of the interest in gaming came from this love of D&D and wanting to sort of replicate that in video games. One of the last games he played was Baldur's Gate 3. And he's a funny guy. He had like 4 different characters, so much save data, so much working on this. Like, he would grind these games, and he never beat it because he would do something to fuck up the story. And then he'd be like, well, looks like I have to start over. And it was just always funny talking to him about stuff like that because, he'd talk about like how cool it was to see this game that he played when he was a kid sort of come to fruition now. And then with me, he's gotten me into video games really since I was a kid, right? So we started on Tekken 1 or Tekken 3. Maybe it was 4. The Tekken on the PlayStation 2. So we started with that one, which I loved. I grew up loving. And then we got a Wii eventually. And the Wii was really like, I was a kid, so it was really exciting to me. And I was, I wasn't the most into video games because I didn't super understand them, especially early on. But quickly, I started playing things like Just Dance, Wii Sports, all these casual experiences, but then that sort of like translated into me becoming more interested in Nintendo themselves and what Nintendo was putting out. So then I started playing games like Mario Galaxy alongside my dad, who usually helped me through these games because I was a bit confused, honestly. And then he grew up playing the original Zelda, so when Skyward Sword came out on the Wii, he was very excited to check it out and see what the capabilities of the Wii had with that game, and him and my brother used to play that a lot, and I'd watch them do that. So I think it sort of instilled in me just a love of video games, the respect of video games, and I always loved the sense of accomplishment it got for me. I remember he took me to GameStop one time, and I got Donkey Kong Country Returns, and I absolutely adored this game, and we sat there and we played it co-op the whole way through, and it is still one of my favorite games because of that. And I just really owe pretty much everything video game wise and also a lot of things in my life to my dad. So I'm not doing well with that. That's why I took a break. But, he's a big sports guy. So we would also play a lot of the sports games like NBA 2K and all that kind of stuff, which I didn't even really realize was so dogged on in the gaming community until I started making videos in here. I do sort of like some of them, but I do see a lot of the valid complaints with it. But playing those, with another person in the same room can be quite fun. And I look back on those times that we played NBA 2K like 13 on the PlayStation 3 very fondly. Then it was around 2014, maybe a little later. I'm not exactly sure what year I got the Wii U. I know I didn't get it right at launch. I think I got it about 2 years later, so maybe 2015. So 2015 Christmas rolls around. Maybe 2014 Christmas. That would make sense. I think I got it 2014 Christmas, and I got a Wii U. And I got Splatoon, and I got Smash Brothers with it. And it was my dad's idea, obviously, and I was very into video games. I was getting more into them at this point, and the Wii U sort of solidified my interest in video games. I really, really adored and loved my Wii U. I didn't even realize it was a failing console until, a couple years into it, because I was like around 13. I didn't really know the difference there. I was like, okay, whatever. And it was funny because my dad had played DDO, Dungeons and Dragons Online. So Dungeons and Dragons Online is like an MMO, but for Dungeons and Dragons, and my dad really liked it because, he loves Dungeons and Dragons, so it was like sort of a translation into this thing. They're constantly adding new things. He kind of likes those types of games, and it was always very fun because we really connected on the way that I loved Splatoon 1 on the Wii U. I had this innate fondness for Splatoon 1 on the Wii U, and I played it all the time. That was the game that I continuously returned to time and time again. We would play the multiplayer together. We'd talk about this game because my game was ever evolving, and that was Splatoon, and his game was ever evolving. So though they are very different games, we sort of had that similarity where we'd always just chat about these games together with. It's always interesting because when I grew up, a lot of my friends were not super into video games, or like they were casually into video games, right? A lot of them. And so like it wasn't the same sort of conversations I'm getting now with you guys and other people on the Spawncast, but where I got those conversations originally, and honestly a big reason why I started this channel in the first place was because of my dad, and he really just like was a great person to talk to about this love of games, and he really, really got me into it for a long time. And it was always fun because he'd sit with me for hours while I would explain the intricacies of Splatoon and why this game is how it operates and all this stuff. And I didn't understand anything, but I'd always do the same in return. He'd go through all these different classes, these subclasses, these different stats that you could get in DDO that I didn't understand at all. But I'd sit there and really try my best to comprehend what he was saying. And I guess that's where my whole gaming adventure started. Really, it was with my dad. I remember we always used to play Wii Sports together too. Because that was a fun era, because that's when the sports side of him would combine with the super nerdy side of him. And that's how I am now, right? So it was really fun because he was like a pro in tennis on the Wii, right? And he would play tennis quite a bit just in real life. And he actually, when I was little, I took tennis lessons for it because he liked it so much. And and I like tennis. I think it's a good one, actually, somewhat play now occasionally, like every few months or so. It's not a lot, but sometimes. But it was just really fun to see that side of my dad, and I'm going to miss it a lot. It's taken a lot of me to make this video. It's taken quite a lot of time, and I didn't really know how I was going to make this video because I still can't really comprehend that my dad is gone. He used to watch the Spawncast every week. He used to watch every one of my videos, and he was a great guy, and I just can't believe it. It's really hard to believe. I don't want to talk about it. I don't really want to answer questions about it. So please don't ask me shit. I'm not going to answer, and I might block you. So try to understand that this is a pretty personal thing for me. Obviously, he's my dad. And that's going to be hard for me for a while. I'm sorry that I stopped uploading, but this is when this whole thing was going down, so. But yeah, that's how I got into gaming. I'm sorry it's a lot heavier than it probably seemed from the title and thumbnail. If you're still here, I love you. You guys are real for that. Tell your parents that you love them, And thank you, Dadafine, for everything you've done for me. I will continue to work very hard and try to make you proud in everything I do. And I will. You really believed in YouTube for me, right? So I'm going to go all in. I'm going to make this shit work. Full-time content creator starts now. Well, I'm still going to go to school and try to do other shit, but this is going to be more of a priority. So new videos every week. I'll see you guys there. Bye.